So let's use, I don't know if Oscar Wilde is our paragon of morality, but yet some of his lines are good, and he uses the line, he says that in modern times, it's not that there's a higher rate of literacy or a lower rate of illiteracy, it's only that illiterate people know how to read. And in his cynical tone, he uses lines like, it's an age where people may know the price of everything but the value of nothing. Or you read more and more about less and less. It captures a very interesting, I would say, paradox, if not, or dissonance, a very profound dissonance in our lives. You can have everything and have nothing. What do I mean by that? You can have all the wealth in the world, have everything that one would wish for, but lack self-respect, self-confidence, self-esteem. What type of life do you have? You can have intelligence, brilliance. You can be brilliant. You can be emotionally sensitive. You can have a warm soul. And yet, if you're lacking dignity, what kind of life do you live? So you could say, one second, I have everything. But here's the key thing. Having things and being something is very different. We often, in this life of this world of acquisition, especially in a fast food age and instant gratification, we replace, or we think we can replace, self-worth with net worth. If we acquire more, if I have more than someone near me has, my neighbor and so on, it makes me better. And people actually believe that. But in truth, it has absolutely no impact. You look at a material universe and you can acquire everything in this material world, including, I don't just mean materialism, financial and objects and so on, but even intelligence and emotions. But if you don't have inner dignity, an inner sense of respect for yourself, self-confidence, that you can take on challenges, all that is a gilded cage. You have all the gold and silver in the world, and it may numb you and it may protect you, but it can't protect you from yourself. You still will be nagged and will gnaw at you the lack of confidence that you have internally. Now, I'm not suggesting you can't have both together, but never think that one replaces the other. There are 4 personality types, archetypes, that define us all. Check out the description below, a course on the Kabbalah of the 4 elements. There's an interesting, a fascinating statement, a cryptic statement in the book called the Sefer Yetzirah. It's considered to be the first Kabbalistic mystical work, attributed to actually Abraham. Some say there's an earlier work called Raziel HaMalach, attributed to Adam. But the consensus is that Sefer Yetzirah is the earliest work. And there's a statement there where he talks about the cosmic order and the evolution of how existence came to be, from higher states of consciousness to this material state of consciousness, from a higher state of unity, as I mentioned, to a state of fragmentation and distinction and ultimately division, which will lead to divisiveness. And says there the following: Esa spheres bli ma. There are 10 spheres without substance. Bli ma. Eser v'loi tesha, 10 and not 9. Eser v'loi achad osar, 10 but not 11. I actually wrote an article right after 9/11, which what happened here in New York and the United States, the attack of 9/11, is literally those words, 10 but not 9, 10 but not 11. Talking about this theme. You can look it up at our site, meaningfullife.com. So, when you say the word 10 but not 9, what is that saying? It's saying that 10 is the full picture, the full spectrum of a healthy psyche. And 9 is not. So what are the 10 and what is the 9? What's the missing one? We'll focus on that. Not 10 but not 11. That's another discussion. So in the mystical scheme of things, the mystical map, the DNA of existence, talks about the main building blocks that define all of existence. Just like you have in physics elements, and then you have molecules, and you have atoms and subatomic particles, which is a structure, it's a map. So we also have, and the human being, we have the DNA, and they're mapping the human genome. There's also a spiritual genome, the spiritual building blocks, and they're called spheres. In Hebrew, sphirot. Spheres, not necessarily the English word spheres as being like circles or sporadic objects, but spheres in the context of 10 types of energies, 10 building blocks. If any of you are familiar with my book on this Omer counting, which deals with 7 of the 10, 7 of the 10 are emotional. I'll spell them out. Love, its antithesis or counter force and balance is discipline. So if love is the flow, then discipline is the focus. If love is the gas, discipline is the brakes, and you need both in any healthy structure. Then comes Tiferet, which is compassion. Netzach, fortitude, ambition, determination. Hoid, humility, yielding. Yesod, bonding, foundation. And finally, the 10th. What's the 10th? Malchut. Malchut means kingship, but I'll define it in human terms as dignity. The top 3, I counted 7. The top 3 are the intellectual faculties. And we're talking here about the conscious faculties, not the supraconscious. The conscious faculties. What are the 3 intellectuals? Chachma, Bina, Dat, which is the 3-step process in any cognitive process, and that is, first there's a spark of an idea, a resonating kernel that begins the process of the intellect becoming a state of a conscious spark. Then comes Bina, which is understanding, fleshing it out, developing it into a full-bodied comprehension. And then comes Das, is sensing and saying, I got it. That's it. It's that the conclusion of a idea where it's not just an abstract idea detached, but you feel it within, it resonates internally, it's internalized. Sometimes compared to Chachma and Bina, the first 2 are sometimes compared to father and mother, and Das is compared to their union. That's why in Torah, sexuality is referred to as V'yoda, Das, because Das is connection. Das isn't just the father's seed and the woman's egg. It's not just the kernel of an idea or the comprehension. It's when it becomes a conception of a newborn idea that is fully integrated and internalized in the womb and begins to give birth to what will come, the emotions that follow, which are considered to be like the children. So there you have the 10 steps, the 10 building blocks. So 3 are intellect, 7 are emotional. Now what happens if you have brilliant Chachma, brilliant Bina, Das, you're a great conceiver of ideas, a great developer of ideas, even though usually one person doesn't have strengths in both areas completely. You have the Das, your Bar Das, a mature understanding of something in a very internalized and seasoned way. And you have love, and you have discipline, you have compassion, and you have determination, and you have humility, and yielding, and you have bonding. Sounds like a perfect human being. But if you don't have dignity, if you don't have the sense of malchut, sense of majesty, that I have value, and not in an arrogant way, that you are worthy of respect and worthy of honor because God put you here, then you're lacking everything. You have everything, but you have nothing. You have a great tool chest. Imagine a person has excellent tool chest, has the best tool chest in the world, has all the instruments, but doesn't know what to do with them, or doesn't have the confidence to know what to do with them. And another person may not have such a sophisticated tool chest and arsenal, but they have confidence in what they need in life, and they can take a little and change the world. So dignity is this thing which is very difficult to really capture in words. How do you define dignity? Love is definable. It may have its mystique, but it's something that you can see. I feel about dignity. And how do you gain dignity when you don't feel it? Now the truth is, it's our birthright. Everybody has natural malchus. However, in a non-nurturing environment, either at home or in society, or facing the hostility of a world of dog eats dog world, what can happen is that your dignity gets trampled upon, and you lose that respect either because somebody intentionally abused or assaulted your psyche and invalidated you time and again, or you're being humiliated at work or in your life, or just life itself has broken you, too many things that have just simply get to you. Very often we pick it up from our parents. If our parents have a weak malchus, very often they convey that to us. Again, that doesn't mean we're doomed. It means it makes it difficult because you then have a uphill battle to regain and reclaim your dignity, which is, of course, what we're going to be discussing at length. But first, let's define what it is. Now, Tisha B'Av. What is the connection to Tisha B'Av? The 9 days. That's exactly what happened in the 9 days. Especially in the second temple. What happened? It says there was sinas chinam, there was baseless hatred, there was fragmentation, more than fragmentation, there was divisiveness. People turned on each other. When you turn on a person, you're essentially assaulting their dignity. What happened was Malchus was being affected and ultimately became shattered. So the destruction of the temple, which we honor on the 9th of Av, both the destruction by the Babylonians and then the second temple by the Romans, a temple, what is a temple? A temple is, the Holy Temple was a bridge, an interface between heaven and earth. That's where heaven kissed earth. A physical building on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem where the divine presence dwelled. Beginning from the Bible, when it talks about V'osu le'migdash v'shachanti b'seicham, what does it say? It says, build for me a holy place, and I will dwell among you. But there's one big condition for this dwelling. You have to be a keli, you have to be a container. So, Barchenu Avinu Kolanu Kecha, there's a statement, God blesses us when we're one. An analogy given by some of the Hasidic masters is, there's no greater joy that when a father, a parent, sees his or her children united. And there's no greater pain than when a parent sees their children fighting. Because then, how can a parent look and be present when their children are fighting among each other? So the temple's destruction wasn't just some punishment. It was cause and effect. You can't be together, you can't be brothers and sisters and love each other and be one. How can my blessing dwell among you? How can I dwell in a house divided? Obviously God can do anything he wishes, but it wouldn't work. So essentially divisiveness, the opposite of what I said before, tikkun, repairing and connecting the shards and connecting the shattered containers, created another shattering, the shattering of the temple, which symbolizes the shattering of Malchus. In Kabbalistic terms, the destruction of the temple is the destruction of Malchus. But when I say destruction, it does not mean complete, utter destruction. It means we still have the foundations are there, we still have the core spark, but the main structure was destroyed. And we have the remnant called the Western Wall. If you ever take a tour beneath the wall, you see the foundations in the ground, and we know this ground is sacred, we don't walk in it, and we wait for the day when the third temple will be rebuilt. And as many say, it will just have to be rebuilt only because it's already ready, but it only has to, the gates have to show them, the gates have to be put up. So the bottom line is it was not completely destroyed, but it was destroyed enough for us to have to go into an exile. What is exile at the end of the day? Exile is displacement. Yet another form of disconnection. Displacement. You feel displaced. You feel out of place. You feel like you don't belong. You're a stranger. And that's what we are in this material world. The soul is like a stranger in the material world. Material world that focuses on its own narcissistic, selfish needs, the animal soul, and all that comes with it. For the soul, this is a very painful place to be, because it's everything antithetical to what spiritual unity and divine pleasure is all about. However, the purpose of existence is for the soul to come to this earth with all its fragmentation and rebuild, repair the shattered psyche, repair the ruptures, the fractures of the malchus, of the dignity of existence. So dignity is really, of all the 10 spheres, dignity is the one that symbolizes most what makes us human. Intelligence is a tremendous and powerful instrument. Emotions and love can change worlds. But without dignity, you don't have the impetus. You don't have the drive. You don't have the sense of confidence to take on life. It's like saying, what do I need all this intelligence for? How many times have I heard this from people? What do I need all this brains and all my emotions if I can't have just a moment of peace within I can't have confidence. I'm afraid of myself. I'm afraid of others. So dignity is where the greatest damage is done, but it's also the place that we have to focus on rebuilding. So what is Tisha B'Av? 10 minus 1. You may have everything, but you don't have the one Malchus dignity ingredient. And the repair of that is the work that we need to do, to fill that one, to return the one into the 9. And it's interesting, 1 is also Echad. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. The most famous of liturgies, Echad, oneness. Oneness is exactly that. It's taking and finding the integral unity, the unified field theory. That oneness that connects everything else. So you can have, as I said, intelligence, you can have the entire circle, but you need to have the hub, the center. That's what creates the real balance. Now that's the work we have cut out for ourselves. So how, especially in our times, when we live in such, I would say, free times, with technology freeing us even more, prosperity unprecedented. And I understand people complain about their finances and so on, but on a collective level, there's never been such prosperity in the world, in the United States, in most of the people in most of the people in the Western world. Tremendous amount of prosperity and ease of life, standard of living, the comforts that we have available to us, with unimaginable years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And yet, when it comes to the issue of dignity, when it comes to self-value, self-respect, as I said, net worth may be there, but self-worth, that may be unparalleled lack, and unparalleled void and vacuum, which just amplifies the Tisha B'Av experience even more so than in previous generations. There are times when people are in a state where they, poverty or oppression, so of course that's a painful state, but they may have had internal dignity. When you have all that you need, food-wise, luxury-wise, the food's available to us. We don't eat just water and bread. Does anybody that you know eat water and bread? Does anyone live a life of such austerity? And yet, internally, we're hungering. You meet people who eat very well physically, who breathe air, who are healthy, who have many elements in their lives that are extremely... The minyan begins soon. You have people who eat very well, but you meet them, they're starving for love, they're starving for acknowledgement, they're starving for respect, and that is the ultimate Tisha B'Av tragedy. The loneliness, the lack, the abuse, the assault on the human dignity of our lives. So it's interesting, we live in a world, as I said, where I don't know if anybody knows someone that just eats bread and water. But there was a time where our ancestors just ate bread and water. And they were extremely healthy psychologically. Today, everyone eats more than that. That's just an example. We have all other types of luxuries and all other types of benefits. And yet you find a level of misery and a level of lack of self-value unprecedented. I cannot speak for millions of people, but you meet people, very few people you meet that do not suffer somewhere from some type of feeling that they've been invalidated, they've been stepped upon, they've been disrespected, and people get used to it. At some point, your threshold gets lower and lower because you begin to tolerate more and more, and it becomes expected. As much as, and I don't want to sound like a Marxist, as much as we may not like Marxist ideas, Karl Marx's ideas, but one thing he points out in his scathing critique of capitalism is the alienation that capitalism creates. The alienation that it creates, which is essentially the way he puts it. I think I mentioned once a number of times here. I had to deliver a paper at Cambridge University. They had an event which was called Affluence and Religion. And they had different speakers speak about the bridge. I was given the topic of money and spirituality. And so I did my research. I read my Marx, I read Adam Smith, and I read all the thinkers and the evolution of economic thought, which is very much connected to sociology and psychology and so on. Because at the end of the day, economics is about understanding human nature, how markets work, how people work, how people buy, how people sell, how people emotionally react to different market forces, etc. So when you read Karl Marx in his original papers, later it became a little more packaged, but in his original writings, there's a thing called the Paris manuscripts, I think of 1840 or something like that, where you see him in his original writing before he met Fred Engel, and before he was, as I said, he had his benefactors, his capitalist benefactors in London, who were supporting his work in criticizing capitalism, mind you, which is, of course, one of the ironies. But talking about, everything has a positive side to it. His critique of capitalism essentially is that it destroys the spirit of the human being. Now, I remember finding a quote from him, and I decided to read it to the audience and ask people who said this. Now I've given it away already, but I read the quote. The quote said like this: that and he wrote in German, of course. So German is similar, has a lot of Yiddish words, or you can say Yiddish has a lot of German words, however you want to put it. But he writes there that in the capitalistic system, what you have is an alienation on many levels. First of all, there's an alienation between boss and worker. The boss it's not an equal relationship. He writes your check, pays your salary, and you have to be subjugated to him. If he is going to be unfair to you, you don't have many rights. And you have to remember that capitalism was affected by Marx and socialist thought. So there was no concept of labor unions and workers' compensation and a lot of things that we have today, which are really socialist ideas that seeped in. Hardcore capitalism was not as gentle as it is today, if you can call it gentle. So he writes that first alienation is between worker and boss. Okay. Second is worker and worker, because people compete to climb the ladder. As a matter of fact, best friends can become enemies because the boss wants to play them one against another, and for them to climb, whoever's more successful will get the better raise, will get a promotion. Then there's the alienation between a person and the product they're creating, because with industrialization, it's not like you're working in the field and you see the fruit of your labor, the potatoes, the rice, the produce that comes through your efforts. You're producing products that you don't even need. You're producing products mass that are being used by others, so you don't even have a connection to the product that you're creating. It's all about the money that it produces, the capital it produces for the boss, and he shares enough to keep you happy, so you should continue producing for him. And then finally he writes the alienation between you and yourself. Because when you're at work, you're not at home, and when you're at home, you're not at work. Your most comfortable place is when you're at home, with your family, with yourself. And here, the workplace is not your home. It's a hostile environment. It may be pleasant, but it's still not your comfortable self. So your soul and your work are dichotomous. So I read this quote without saying who it was, and I asked the audience, secular audience, and I said, who said this? So they see me, so they say, one person said the Kotzker Rebbe, someone said the Baal Shem Tov, someone said a Rav Kook. Everyone came up with interesting, different things. Nobody guessed. So I said, it was Marx. So someone yelled out in the back and said, Groucho Marx? I said, no, not Groucho Marx, Karl Marx. And people couldn't, because with all, as I said, with all the critique, remember, his ideas are brilliant. The problem was he didn't have a viable alternative. What did he suggest in turn? That there's no privatization of the economy, of work, and everybody works equally, and everybody gets according to their needs. So you basically create one collective pot, and everybody puts the money into that pot, and then it's divided based on people's needs. You have 10 children, you get more. You have children going to school, you get allocated for that. There's one small problem. A lot of Jews and a lot of intellectuals were drawn to this because it was a utopian vision of a world where there's no competition, where everybody's working towards one goal and everybody's getting what they need. It sounds great idealistically, right? One small problem. Who's deciding what everyone has to get? Who's controlling the pot? Let's put it this way. So there was actually an argument. There was the so-called more radical, like the communist version of Marx, the Lenin, there's the Stalin version, and there was the more socialist version. The real extreme version said that we need to have what they call, that's what Marx writes, that there's a specter hanging over Europe, it's called communism. That the world would have to change entirely. Because even if one person on earth that still owns private property, it undermines the whole system. You need everybody participating. But the problem is, how do you create a revolution like this overnight? So some felt you start slowly. Let's first take the Soviet Union, China, etc., and then you take over the rest of the world. Others felt you can't really bring communism unless everybody agrees. So there's debates back and forth. But the question really is, till the transition takes place, who's going to watch over the private property? So what happened was, the irony of all ironies is that the abuse of individual power is abused by communism, nothing close to any capitalist. Because in truth, capitalism, yes, there's a certain unfairness. The wealthy are wealthy, the poor are poor. The wealthier become wealthier, they control and they manipulate, no question. But there is more than one wealthy. What happened in, for example, the Soviet Union? One Lenin, and then even worse, one Stalin. He controlled it all. So suddenly one man controlled everything. So how did it solve the problem? And he abused it to the fullest. He didn't give anyone individual rights, and he didn't share the money with everyone equally. So that means you can't trust a human being to suddenly control this pot. I'm not going to go through a whole analysis of Marxism, but the bottom line, a viable alternative he did not offer. So his critique stands, and it's good critique. And we see it playing itself out even in the United States. You know, the United States was not built by the founding fathers. They didn't build this country based on greed. They built it on all men are created equal, based on rights, based on spiritual rights, inalienable human rights. And that would create an environment. But once money becomes, people make money, that's what happens. They do become greedy, and it does become alienating. I mean, you ask anybody that's in this, especially in the financial world, they tell you it's complete shark. You do not have friends. You can lose your closest friends because it's all about making the profit and climbing. And to the point you do lose your soul in many ways. So Marx was correct. I wrote that paper I delivered in Cambridge is online if you want to read it. It's like a longer essay, several six-part essay on what's the Torah's answer to this. Because you see, Torah does not advocate socialism. Torah does not say no private property, which is the cornerstone of communism, of Marxism. Torah says only the Levites, only the tribe of Levi did not have private property. But everybody else, absolutely. The land of Israel was divided. People owned property. And there's entire laws, entire tractates in the Talmud that talk about acquisition of property, exchange of property. The Torah's ultimate answer, since I'm already on the topic, I'll just say one briefly, is charity. It's tzedakah. That tzedakah, charity, is the ultimate redemption. We say, charity is ultimately the answer. Self-imposed. Meaning that people have to, on their own, understand that it's God's gifts. But bottom line is, without God, you can't really have an economy that will be a fair economy. So both Marx has good arguments, and capitalism has its weaknesses, but you need to have the divine dimension, which of course Marx cut out by saying that religion is the opiate of the masses. So essentially he cut out the ultimate reason, the only way that really you can create an equality among a competition, a financial competition, which of course the argument of capitalism is that if people are not going to benefit from greed, they're not going to be driven to succeed. Why would I work harder if I'm getting anyway only a certain amount back? But getting back to our topic here, that is very true, money and the money markets and the acquisition of wealth to the point of obscenity, to the point even if you don't have it, people are running after it. A lohut, what's the expression? Odom lohut achem amayim. A person is, it's hard to define. Lohut is a Hebrew word which means like obsessed, like almost a obsession with finance. Is no question is an ultimate assault on human dignity, because it means more money means you're more special. How many people have I heard this from? You know, I just a few weeks ago I was meeting someone. I mean, it's always painful to repeat these type of stories. And she's telling me about the abuse she grew up in a home. Father was a monster. She says, but he had money. So he was honored. And she said the worst possible day for her was when she had to go to the shul or to the dinner, and her father getting honored, and pictures, and smiling, and everybody's so happy. And she knew him to be a monster. So there's where you have clearly how the gilded cage, you know, you smear a little silver and gold. You can take something that is completely, I don't want to use any expletives, but complete despicable individual, despicable behavior is something glossed over when there's some money. And how many people criticize that and they say it comes to money? Everybody. Where we all know in our minds, and we know from the Torah that wealth, even though Rebbe Machabed Ashirim, the Talmud says that Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, honored the wealthy, but as it's explained, he didn't honor the wealthy because he bowed to them, is because God blessed them with opportunity. So he honored that opportunity, but no way would compromise his values. Once wealth replaces, it creates the value that replaces true value, that's when the problems begin. But we live in such a world. And if it's not wealth, it's power or influence or other external forces. So when you talk about Tisha B'Av, if you think about it, it's I don't like to say the word brilliant, but it's fascinating that almost 2,000 years ago, and then 2,000 and some years ago for this first temple and the second temple, both destroyed on this day, the 9th day of Av, and there's no accidents. Why on the 9th? Why not on the 10th? Why not on the 8th? Because the Sefer Yetzirah, as I said before, says 10 but not 9. It talks about the building blocks of existence, or the building blocks of the psyche, is 10 but not 9. Now one little thing is missing. What's missing? You can have all the intellectual qualities and virtues, Chachma Bina Das, which is wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Or sometimes the conception, comprehension, and internalization. You can have the emotions. You can have love in the fullest sense of the word, and discipline, and compassion. That's Chesed Gvur Tiferes. Netzach Chayid Yesod, which is determination, and humility, and foundation or bonding. But if you're missing Malchus, dignity, so it's like having the most sophisticated arsenal and army, the most sophisticated tool chest. You have all the brilliance and all the emotions. You can be a good person, a sensitive person, a kind person, a genius. But you're lacking one most important thing: self-respect, dignity, malchus. You're lacking honor. And what do you have then? You really have nothing. What do you need? A tool chest with all the tools when you don't know how to really use them, you don't have the confidence to use them properly. Or you use them in ways that just are self-aggrandizing, self-building yourself, or covering up your lack of dignity with buying more things or hoarding. Remember, it's not no name, so there's no Lashon Hara, but I remember someone describing an individual that I met that was very obnoxious. And he tells me, I said, what's the story with this guy? He says he hides his ignorance with his arrogance. I thought it was a good way to put it. So we all are hiding things. When a person has no self-confidence, what do you think they usually do? They behave like they have a lot of self-confidence. How? By trying to control others. Why would someone need to control another person? If you're really confident with yourself, why do you need to control someone else? It doesn't make any sense. It's because you don't control over yourself, so you try to control others. I know it's always packaged in nice ways. I really care about the person, I have high standards, and I really want to impose it on someone else. But the need for control is a need for compensating for lack of inner control and inner dignity. It's a given. You can rest assured it's almost the case. There may be some exceptions. So what's happening here, so that's exactly what the Sefer Yetzirah says. 10 but not 9. Why does it have to say that? 10? 10 is a complete number, the complete structure. Misper HaShalom is called 10 as the mathematicians know. 10. Long before the metric system where they developed everything in numbers of 10, units of 10, you have a sefer from Amunas V'Deis from the Rasag, and there's a sefer called the Milas HaYigoyin from the Rambam, where they talk about numbers, and they say number 10 is the complete number, which you see in Judaism. 10 commandments, 10 utterances, Asara Mamoros, 10 faculties, 10 spheres. The number 10 is the complete number. And there's reasons why. They explain how 10 is the complete. It's 3 times 3 plus the 10th dimension. So why is the Sefer Yetzirah 10 but not 9? Because it's saying if you don't have the Malchus, you have Tisha B'Av. Well, how could God rest on this earth? The temple was a beautiful temple. If you read the description of the temple, especially the second temple was even more beautiful than the first. And you see from even the Bible, you had to use the best materials. and gold, silver, and copper. And everything was created in a very perfect way. You know that in the temple, nothing was extra. There was no such thing as extra piece of gold. Everything was used perfectly because it was considered to be exactly what's necessary. Because that's what perfection is. Not more, not less. To the point, just as an aside, you usually see in synagogues the tablets, the Ten Commandments are engraved on 2 tablets. So most tablets, what does the image look like? They're round on top, right, and square on the bottom. Based on the Talmud, Baba Basra, it's clearly wrong, because it says there that the luchas oichelas es ha'aron, which means because in the temple nothing was extra space, since the aron, the ark for sure, was square or a rectangle, but basically was a was a box without rounded spaces. So if the tablets would be round, that would mean there'd be extra space inside the aron. And based on the Talmud, that echelas means that it reached in all directions, is like filled the entire space, you'd have to say that the tablets were squarish. Just as an aside. So the temple was built, the koved l'tiferes, that's the expression, to honor, beauty. Everything was there. Now, not because Judaism worships external, but because outer beauty is an expression of inner beauty. So we say, Yifas Toyar, Yifas Mara. Beauty, Zek Keli Vanveyu. Beauty is considered a virtue, even physical beauty. If physical beauty is seen separate from inner beauty, then it's Hevel Achen v'Sheker Achen v'Hevel Ayefi. Then it's hollow, it's empty. What's external beauty? But external beauty that is an expression of internal is absolutely. That's why it's considered Yifas Mara when you say the imaz, the matriarchs were beautiful, both in the shape of their faces, the look of their faces. That's a quality. And then you say do a mitzvah, you have to do it beautiful. A beautiful mezuzah, a beautiful Shabbos table, a beautiful Sefer Torah, a beautiful tefillin. I think it creates hadar. You take a beautiful fruit, citron for esrog on Sukkot. So you have all this beauty, then suddenly Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, and then 490 years later, the Titus and the Romans go into this temple, they desecrate it, they destroy it, and the Jews are exiled. How is that possible? As I said before, it's not possible for only one reason. Because what's the beauty of this temple worth, God said, if you, my children, can't get along with each other? Sinas chinam. If you can't communicate with it, what do I need a beautiful home? How many people have I heard from grew up in unbelievable mansions and homes? They said it was loveless. It was lifeless. I came to a home. It had everything. We had everything we needed. But there was, except one thing, no love. Nobody was there. I never saw my mother. I never saw my father. So what do I need this big mansion for? That's the example. A temple that became soulless because if the people can't get along, what God says, what's my point of resting among you? You have all the 9 beautiful faculties, but you're missing Malchus. And that's Tisha B'Av. So the 9 is not just some incidental day. It absolutely focuses 9, missing the 10th. It's missing Malchus. It has everything. The temple had everything, but one thing, I need people. God cannot rest in a place, dwell among us if we're not at peace with each other. That's the rule. That's how it is. So then began this long displacement called Golus, exile, with a purpose. It's not a purpose to punish. It's a purpose to repair. Now figure it out. There's a beautiful, this Shabbos, which is this year's Tisha B'Av, and we don't fast because of Shabbos until Saturday night and Sunday. But it's also Shabbos Chazon. Shabbos Chazon refers to the vision of Isaiah. Yeshayahu Hanavi, the vision that he had about the destruction, which we read in the Haftarah of this week. Now, Shabbos Chazon is always read the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, or on Tisha B'Av like it is this year. So that's Chazon. That's Yeshaya. That's why we call it Shabbos Chazon. Comes Lev Yitzchak Bar Ditchever, and he has seemingly a contradictory take on it. Obviously, it can't be contradictory, but what he says is, he says, What's Chazon? Chazon refers to every Jew is shown a vision on this Shabbos, is shown the third temple from a distance, and is told that it's in your hands to rebuild it. And he gives an analogy. He says that God is the father. A father, a king, in the great love of his child, decides to give his child a gift. And what's the gift? A beautifully embroidered garment. Like a kshenis pasim, like Jacob gave Yosef. He doesn't say that, I'm just adding that. Okay, beautiful. And the child, of course, receives the gift, puts on the garment, and in a little time, 410 years, the garment is playing around and the garment gets torn, ripped. So God then goes, the father goes and gives him even a better garment. He has weaved for him even a nicer and more beautiful garment. And again, the child in his immaturity spoils and destroys the garment. So this time the father says, this is what I believe Yitzchak Baditchever's Moshel analogy. This time the father says, I'm going to weave for you even a better and a more beautiful garment, but this time I'm not giving it to you. I will show it to you once a year, on the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, or on Shabbos of Tisha B'Av. And when you'll see it, and you will yearn and aspire to have it, and you'll earn your way and pay your dues and not take it for granted like a spoiled child, but pay your dues and earn it, then I will give it to you, and then I know for sure it will never be destroyed again. That's Rabbi Yitzchak Baditchever's analogy. It's cited by Rabbi Hillel Parasher, who was one of the big Chabad Chassidim. And it's not surprising that Rabbi Yitzchak Baditchever would see the positive side to Chazon. Yeshaya saw destruction, and Rabbi Yitzchak Baditchever saw construction, because that's how he generally interprets things. For example, where it says in Eicha, is it Eicha? Am Kovid Oven, a nation that is heavy with sin. So Rabbi Yitzchak Baditchever comes and interprets a nation for whose sin is heavy and difficult to do. And it's understood, especially when you study Hasidic thought, that this isn't a play of words. It's the deeper interpretation that you can read the same verse. On the surface level, you read a negative, but those with deeper eyes can read a positive, which is the common thing. You see people sometimes, you see children, teenagers who may be acting out or rebelling. So many people would see it as a negative, and someone with deeper eyes and more sensitivity can say, this person has certain strength. Let's figure out how to use that child's rebellion for a positive way. So it's not a question of two different approaches. It's not a question of a contradiction. It's just a question of how you see things. Now, this is not just a Hasidic, nice, cute idea. It's actually a Talmud. The end of Makos is a whole Talmud that talks about this, where Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues were looking at the Temple Mount. And remember, this is not long after the temple was destroyed. And Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues began to weep, because they saw Shohalim, they saw a fox walking around in the holy ground where the temple stood, where the Holy of Holies was, once the Holy of Holies. And they see fox, it was like a wilderness. They see wild animals running around there. The worst possible. Even today, it's more or less like that. And Rabbi Akiva, and why are they crying? Because they say they see the fulfillment of the prophecy, of the vision of the temple being a place of wilderness, barren wilderness. And Rabbi Akiva began to laugh, and they said, "What are you laughing about?" So he says, because he sees the fulfillment of the end of the prophecy, that after the barren wilderness will come the redemption, and the Gula, and so on, and there will be the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. So the end of the Gemara is Akiva nechamtani, Akiva nechamtani. Akiva, you've consoled us. Akiva, you've consoled us. So the obvious question is, what did he see that they didn't see? And why did he see it and they didn't see it? The answer is because you could look with the same vision, you could look at the same thing, and two people see something else. You look with a certain set of eyes, you see a building raised with a Z, and you see nothing there, you see destruction. And someone else may say, 1 second, they raised the building in order to build a better building in its place. Now Rabbi Akiva had that ability, he had the ability to see further. Why? Because he was Rabbi Akiva. Who was Rabbi Akiva? His name indicates it, like Akev, like Yaakov, the heel. He was either a convert or a child of converts. And we know the story that until age 40, he knew nothing in Torah, whatever the reason was. And then he went and he became the greatest Kul Alibad Rabbi Akiva, became, with a long story short, the greatest Talmudic scholar of all. Everything follows Rabbi Akiva. And he had the 5 great students, Rashbi, Rabbi Meir, and so on and so forth. So Rabbi Akiva, because he came from darkness, appreciated, was able to see beyond darkness. Those that didn't experience darkness, thank God, don't see always the light within the darkness. And you see this inconsistently. Rabbi Akiva has the capacity to see in that fashion. There are more examples. It's not for right now. I'll give one more example. There's an argument between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, which is a very seemingly semantic argument that doesn't make any sense ostensibly. They say that when the Jews stood at Sinai, so they were given positive commandments and negative commandments, right? So what did the Jews respond? When the Eibishter said, Kabed es avicha, it's a positive. So they said, Hein, yes. Okay, everyone agrees, that's obvious. He said, yes, they agree, they accept. But what did they say when Hashem said, Lo signev? Or the other lawyers, do not do. What did they say there? So Rabbi Shmuel says they said no. Rabbi Akiva said they also said yes. Not yes, they'll do it. Yes, they won't do it. Rabbi Shmuel said they said no, we won't do it. Rabbi Akiva said yes, we won't do it. So what's the difference? What's the argument? Al hein hein, val lav hein, or lav lav. What does it mean? So one powerful answer, I heard this from the Rebbe. I'm sure there are many different answers, but this answer is and fits to their personality. Rabbi Yishmael was a Kohen Gadol. He lived in the light. He was a person of privilege. So for him, when he saw a positive is a positive, a negative is a negative, a yes is a yes, a no is a no. Rabbi Akiva lived in a world of no. He understood what darkness was. So he saw the yes even in the no. So they said yes. They didn't just say no, which means that the negative has in it a positive dimension to it. So they're not just arguing about words. Obviously, in both contexts, they wouldn't do it. But one is not doing it, avoiding it, and one is, by avoiding it, you are revealing a deeper light. So the point is that when you look at Chazon, Levi Yitzchak Berditchev looks at Chazon, so Yeshaya is speaking the vision that he sees. But remember, the end of the Haftarah is Sim b'mishpat tepodah v'shaveh b'zdaka. It doesn't end with destruction. It says Zion will be redeemed with mishpat, law, Torah, and with charity, its captives will be freed. So Yitzchak Berditchev is saying, especially in the end of days, we're getting closer to the days of time of Mashiach, that we're shown the Beis HaMikdash, that's the Chazon, the vision. In order to what? Will elicit in us the gaguim, the yearning, the aspiration to gain that. You show something to someone in order to awaken them a yearning for it. And that's the connection back to what I was saying before about dignity. So interestingly, it's not that 9, 10 and not 9, when you're missing that the dignity or the majesty, it's over. It's not over. A year like this, especially, even not a year like this, Tisha B'Av has a dual side to it. It's the darkest time. But when is Mashiach born? The Medrash tells the story that the sages were traveling up north near Tzfat, near northern Israel, and they came to a farm, and it was the time when the Romans had begun burning the Beis HaMikdash. And it says an Arab farmer had a cow. And the cow began to groan. Gosa parasha. And the Arab farmer, this is what the Medrash says, the Arab farmer in Echarab, the Arab farmer tells the sages, tells the rabbis, tells the Jews, your temple was just destroyed. The groan of the cow was sensing that something terrible had happened. So of course they were devastated. And then a moment later, a little more, a few moments later, the cow groaned again. Second time. And he says, and your Redeemer was just born. Mashiach, Neilda Mashiach, Mashiach Shal Yisrael. So of course the question is, what is this exactly? Which is, the Arizal says, that's why we say Nachem, Tisha B'Av in the afternoon by Mincha. Nachem is a consolation prayer. But we know that's when the flames were at their highest. The highest point was in the afternoon of the 9th of Av. Because in the throes of darkness is the birth of Mashiach, because there's no such thing as that devastation as an end in itself. Within the darkest moment comes the healing. Now this year, it's an interesting question when exactly all this takes place. Because Shabbos, we don't say Nachem. And obviously Shabbos is not a fast day. But on the other hand, the destruction happened on Tisha B'Av, not on the 10th of Av. So that's another discussion, how we understand it. But you could say, the last year of the Rebbe's talks that I remember, there was Tisha B'Av, Tafshin Nun Aleph, 1991. So he compared the 9th of Av and 10th of Av to Erev Yom Kippur, which is also 9 and 10. And Kol ha'echel v'sheisa b'tishi is ki'ilu achel v'hisana v'achel in Be'asiri. That's why we eat an extra meal. So talking about basically experiencing the same thing. One is through eating and one is through fasting. So this year, when Tisha B'Av is on Shabbos, obviously it's a mitzvah to celebrate Shabbos. But in a way, you're experiencing the Tisha B'Av in a positive light in that sense. But regardless how you understand it, the point I'm making here is that the fact that someone's dignity may have been compromised, and our egos, and our self-respect or self-esteem shattered in some way or another, or fractured, is not the end of the story. Within it lies the healing. So even though it's 10 and not 9, it's 9, it's missing the 1, but it's not over. The challenge is how to find the healing in the process. So as I mentioned about Rabbi Akiva, the first place is to recognize that those of us whose dignity has in some way been compromised can appreciate dignity more than those who have not. I always tell the story about that woman from St. Louis reading my book, and the note she wrote to me. I'll just share it briefly because it so captures the story so well. So here I was in St. Louis, and I spoke there after Toward a Meaningful Life was published. And after I returned to New York, I received this note. This was a note that till this day still shakes me up and resonates. One of these defining moments. So she wrote to me that I was in the audience when you spoke. I wanted to come over to speak to you, but I decided easier for me to write to you. And she writes that she's a 47-year-old executive living in St. Louis, works at a very prominent firm, is very successful, has made a lot of money. By all accounts, she's a success story. She said, but beneath the veneer lies a woman in shreds. See, my soul was murdered when I was a young child in the home, the abusive home I grew up in, where I endured physical, emotional, sexual, psychological abuse. And my soul was murdered. And life has been hell ever since. I have absolutely no self-worth. I feel constantly as someone that's like worthless and worse than worthless. I've tried all types of therapy. Nothing's really worked. Relationships are a mess. I don't trust. No one trusts me. I'm always testing people. Intimacy is a mess. So I've long given up hope. What do people like me do when you lose inner control? You create outer control. You become super ambitious and super driven, successful. You do anything just to numb and somewhat mask your anguish. But it really doesn't work. It's just day to day. So often very suicidal thoughts. And from day to day, I just go, I breathe in, I take it day by day. Someone gave me a copy of your book. I'm Jewish, but unaffiliated. I never went anywhere to anything, no connection to anything Jewish, but I began looking through the book, and a line jumped out at me that struck me like a bullet between my eyes. And they touched a deep chord inside of me. And that is the following. What it said there, the line was, birth is God saying that you matter. And then she writes again, and I read it again, birth is God saying that you matter. And I read it a third time, birth is God saying that you matter. And I will read it the rest of my entire life. And I suddenly realized after 47 years of hell that despite what my parents did and told me of how worthless I am, I was an accident, I was a mistake. Nobody wants me, nobody needs me, I'm valueless, I'm just a... And despite what society tells us that our value is nothing more than the statistic on someone's balance sheet, and that we are defined by our looks, and by our youth, and by our performance, and by our buying power, and our social status, despite all that, I realize now that I matter to the one that matters most, God. And even if I achieve nothing on a certain day, and I don't have the looks, and I don't have the buying power, and I don't have the status, I still am indispensable and absolutely necessary. And then she concludes her note like this. So though I have many years to heal, I have my work cut out for me. And that is, listen to this, to create bypass surgery, to bypass the infected arteries that were so polluted by the abuse I endured, and reconnect to that pure moment at birth. Birth is God saying you matter, the moment where God said, you're my child, I need you, and I love you, no matter what. And then her last line in the note was, thank you for giving me back my life. Yeah. So, you can imagine, or maybe you can't imagine, I was like crying when I read it. I was like so shaken by it. Firstly, a woman shares her sacred confidence. She doesn't know me never met her before. She just came to hear me speak one night. And I went back to read the chapter, frankly, even though I wrote it. But a book is not yours. Once it's written, it belongs to the reader. So I wanted to read it from her eyes, from her perspective. And I read it, and I appreciated it in a different way, obviously, because I never thought of it quite that way. I wrote her back a note, offering her my help, support, kind words, if anything I can do. I can't tell you how much I was taken by this, by what she wrote. And I asked her permission to tell the story. She gave me permission, obviously. She asked me not to say her name, and not because she said, I'm sure there are people who want to contact me that think they can help me, or they're going to offer, or they have similar stories. So it stays till this day between me and her. But I've told the story to hundreds of thousands of people for sure. Because over the years, I tell the story many times. And the story continues to haunt me, to be honest, till this day. And the way I understand Tisha B'Av so much deeper because of this story. I'll tell you why. I remember when it was, years later, I wrote back. We write to each other once in a while. We email each other. Still struggles, but I wrote to her, since I've been telling your story and since I remember it happening, I think about it all the time about, do I really matter? And I ask audiences, and I've asked so many people, I said, do you matter? Do you think you matter? So first people chuckle and they think it's like some type of joke. What kind of question is that? Of course I matter. I have a healthy ego. I have plaques on the wall. I have this achievement, that achievement. I have family that tells me they love me. I have children, I have grandchildren, I have parents, whatever it is. Yeah, obviously I understand that. That's not the point. So I said, let me rephrase the question. If you were never born, would it make a difference to anybody? In other words, do you cosmically matter? Do you matter on a cosmic level? Remember, if you aren't born, it's not a tragedy if you don't appear because no one's expecting you. Obviously, once you're here, what we'll call circumstantial value you have, which means you're here, so we do everything to justify our existence, and many of us do great things. People bring up beautiful families, people do great charity work, people do other philanthropy, other kindness, and that's not the question. I'm not suggesting everything we do is valueless. But do you really matter on a cosmic level? There's 7 billion people on the planet. If you weren't around, would it make a big difference to whom? Besides your circle. And what bigger, in the bigger picture does it make a difference? Or is it another grain of sand? So we all know the story where the guy is going on a beach and throwing clams back into the water. And someone says, what are you doing? He says, I'm saving the clam. He says, you know how many there are? There are millions. He says, but it matters to this one. So we all understand, like the Mishnah says, you save one person, you save a universe. That's not the question here. We understand life is that way. But on a true level, do you really matter on that way? And I can tell you, people become uneasy when you push them that way. Do I really? Many people say, I don't really know if I matter on that level. You know, if I wasn't around, would it really change? Everyone would have managed, you know. They say the joke about the guy who thought he was the most important person in the universe, that when he was buried in the Har HaZeisim on the Mount of Olives, so it says here, Pa Nitman, Mishu Shachoshav Sha'elam I Efsher Litkayim Biladei. Here lies a person who thought that the world can't exist without him. You know, I mean, it's a cynical joke. Maybe it's a little morbid, but the point is that when you start thinking of it this way, that's a bigger question. Look, I'm the oldest of 5 children, so yeah, the oldest usually a little spoiled, as you could ask my siblings. And often siblings have to go to therapy because of you. You never have to go because of them, because you're the oldest. So your parents tell you that you're special and so on. But then you say to yourself, and I said to myself, okay, so I'm special because my parents told me I'm special. And what happens, God forbid, one day your parents tell you you're not so special? I'm not saying they will, but in the case, so your stocks go down? So in other words, they give you value and they can take value, which is what happened to this woman. So then what she taught me was that the eclipse of the sun can teach you more about light than light of the sun can teach you. See, she did not have the luxury or the dignity of being valued by her family and parents. On the contrary, they did everything the opposite. They robbed her of her dignity. But because of the fact that she had nothing, so she came to realize the only truth there is, that you only really matter because God put you here. Now, I don't envy her, and I'm not suggesting that I wish on her and on everyone you never have to come through a darkness like that. But her darkness taught her a truth that most of us will never come to in our lives. Like Rabbi Akiva's truth. You can only go through the fire to come to such a truth. And that birth is God saying, you matter, that you matter. And if you think about it, in the Torah, the first statement about the human being is what? It's interesting. It doesn't say a person who's going to do mitzvahs. It doesn't say a person of intelligence, a person of emotions. It says something completely mystical, actually. Nasa Adam b'tzalmeinu k'dmusenu. Nivra Adam nivra b'tzelem Elokim. That the human being is created in the divine image. However you explain that, divine image, a piece of God, a picture of God. Now we know God doesn't have an image, as Abraham Joshua Heschel used to challenge the students and say, where's the only place in the Torah where God defies the cardinal sin? It says, don't build anything, any graven images, don't build anything in divine image. And God himself built something in his image called the human being. Okay, so you got to wrap your head around what that means exactly. Okay, we have Bchira, Reitzelitis here. Yes, we can worship ourselves. Hein haya adam ka'achad memenu. That's what it says. That's what the Torah says, that he had to expel Adam and Eve from the garden, because if not, they would have thought that they are godly. Okay, but the point is that that's how the description of the human being, and if you think about it, is the single most powerful statement and the single least focused statement in our yeshiva system, and that is that you have dignity, you are godly. The founding fathers understood that statement, and they created a whole institution called the United States of America with a Declaration of Independence, a Constitution based on that verse, that all human beings are created equal, and because of their divine, because the Creator has endowed them with inalienable rights. The first country, the first government in history that acknowledged and turned into an institution, a biblical statement. You could trace it; it's taken straight from those verses. They understood the power of that, because that's the only thing that really gives a person absolute rights. If I'm the one that gives you rights, I could take away your rights. That was their whole point, that not King George of England and no king anywhere, you don't control our lives. Monarchs and rulers in the church ruled for centuries, and they came to realize, no, all human beings have equal rights. Now, we take it for granted today, but this is not, 400 years ago, this was non-existent on the planet. The only ones that worshipped this idea or valued this idea were Jews. For Jews, it was always, even a criminal hanging was not allowed to hang overnight because it's a divine image. What do you mean? He's a criminal. He's a person who deserved to be killed. Yeah, he was killed for his sins. The sins caused, but don't ever think that his dignity should be abused because of that. Dignity, malchus. So this woman, to me, captures both the story of Tisha B'Av and its redemption. The story of Tisha B'Av, she's a living Tisha B'Av, a person whose dignity was stripped from her. She's brilliant, rich, everything, all the qualities, but she's missing the thing that was most important, self-esteem. She didn't value herself. She was even suicidal, as I mentioned. But in that darkness, she discovered the truth. And I feel honored that I was part of that journey. Not that I did anything, to be honest, I wrote it. But she discovered the truth, and the truth that only someone in such darkness can discover. That real value, real dignity does not come from people, and does not come from money, and does not come from all the 9 spheres. It comes from God, Malchus. Les lamagamo klum, Malchus has nothing of its own, like the moon. The sun is very bright, the sun is a powerful engine, powerful fuel. The moon, nothing of its own, but it has more than the sun has. It has everything because it ends up getting dignity. So the moon gets wounded, but the moon also gets repaired. The Zohar is a fascinating Zohar, where on the pasuk that a kohen should not be a Baal Mum, a kohen cannot serve if he's handicapped. And the Zohar asks the question, well, why? And why is someone handicapped in the first place? So he says the interesting thing, that those born in the second half of the month, when the moon is wounded, Pagam alavana, also have a Pagam. So they basically participate, they suffer together with the moon, except through if they pray, and they can make sure they won't be one handicapped. So it's not that the Kohanim are second class, they are a reflection of the wound of the moon. That's what the Zohar says, in Emer. There's a whole discourse from the Alter Rebbe on it, a very fascinating discussion on the topic. So some people suffer in our lives, not because they suffer. Actually, it's not in Emer, it's in Vayeshev. My mistake, Vayeshev, because it comes after why Yaakov had to suffer. Bikish Yaakov Leishav B'Shal, because there's some tzaddikim that are bound with the destiny of the world. Just like Moses had to stay in the Midbar, and other tzaddikim, even though they may not have sin, but they carry the wound of the generation. It says it about Mashiach too. So the moon's wound is also its salvation. The Zohar continues. That's why they will celebrate more than anyone. As the moon gets renewed, they too will get renewed. The point I want to make here is that Tisha B'Av is after the fact now. We all have a dignity that in some way has been compromised. But not ever think that it's over with that. We have the ability, through sometimes the lack of something, to appreciate more what real dignity is. So unfortunately, or I would say unfortunately, some people who can live in their comfort zone and delude themselves that they have everything, even though they may not have that inner confidence, and they cover it up by the possessions they have, by the money that they have. But if a person is truthful, and a person who does not have that, that's an awakening to recognize that you can get something which is the most powerful thing of all, is that inner sense of confidence. And that comes from our divine connection, exactly what this woman discovered. Not through possessions, not through looks, not through anything external, which is where we usually run, but from the fact that God put you here. So there's an interesting expression. It says, the God, so-called, he calmed his anger, not calmed. He released his anger on the Eitzim and Avon. The anger, which of course God doesn't get angry. Angry is a form of detachment because the Jews had baseless hatred, sinas chinam. So it says that he released his anger on the wood and on the stones. Instead of killing the people, he let the Beis HaMikdash be destroyed. And it's seen actually as a sign of love. It's like when things get so bad, so you think you could take it out on the people that were the ones that did it. So now you took it out on the building. What does that mean exactly? So I'll just use a psychological or even a medical example. I've used it a number of times, hypothermia. So you see, the human body is a fascinating and unbelievable power. Its immunity system is like miraculous. That when a body goes into, let's say, is attacked, a child falls in the God forbid, under the ice, cold water, or there's an accident. So the body goes into a new set of emotions to preserve itself. Shock, for example, is one of the ways the body shuts down more external resources in order to preserve the vital organs. Hypothermia is a state which for many years people thought was death. But the body completely shuts down, even the heart stops beating, therefore you think it's death. But it's really the body going into almost a numb-like state in order to save. So the body will do things, which is the reason that blood rushes, for example, where there's an infection, because the body is doing everything to save life. So a lot of the things that we see as being negatives are actually positives to save life. Now obviously it's a positive response to a negative situation. For example, what is an infection really? An infection is a bacteria or a germ that entered the body, and the white blood cells are going to attack it. As a result, into an infection. Pus, it's like a battle. So really, the infection is an outgrowth of healing, not the cause of the problem. It's coming to solve. That's how we figure out that there's an infection, through antibodies. You see the white blood cells gathering somewhere, you know there's something going on there. So in that sense, if you think of it that way, so hypothermia, is that a positive or negative? So under the circumstances, it saves people's lives. Psychologically, this is also true. I mentioned it a number of times, that you have sometimes people who've endured very serious abuse will have out-of-body experiences because they can't tolerate the fact that it happens, so they literally separate from themselves. This is a proven phenomenon. I don't mean physically separate, it means psychologically they almost create dual personality. So you have the idea that sometimes to save something you have to shut everything down. So in a sense, when God released the anger on the Eitzim Avon was saying basically, there's no point to have this building anymore because I can't rest among you as long as you are not connected with each other. It's like a body that's broken down and the organs are fighting with each other. So, but I will release this energy, this negative energy on the building, so you can have the time that you'll need to heal and rebuild, and then I'll give you back the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, the third temple. So when you think of these things on that deeper level, you come to realize that's exactly the story. When I read the Marx papers, I came to realize, we do live in a world of capitalism, and there is an alienation. But that doesn't mean we can't do anything about it. Our job is to introduce the divine, the birth is God saying you matter, into an existence that is temporary and that deceives and seduces us into thinking that it's powerful. So it's actually a great challenge. That living in a prosperous world like ours, in a world where technology and information overload is keeping us busy all day and all night. And if you can overcome that by saying, I'm going to introduce dignity into a world that is stripping us of dignity, then you're really achieving something. So I find it a personal pleasure to sometimes go on Facebook Live or YouTube or whatever it is, go right into the belly of the beast, a world that is, if you look what's on there, is like all kinds of nonsense, and try to share a message how technology is destroying us, using technology to share the message that technology is not going to save your life. I like that concept. It's like that you cut down the tree with the tree. The handle of the axe comes from the tree that it cuts down. So you need to sometimes cut. You need to go. The antibodies, the homeopathy. You use the negative against itself. Now, I'm not suggesting technology is negative nor anything in this world. It's all neutral. But that's the world in which we live. So if we can take a world like ours, where dignity has been where there's 9 but not 10. You have Tisha B'Av, not just once a year, but the dignity is basically, has been stripped from many of us, or to some extent, and reintroduce it. This is the ultimate achievement of our time. To take the 9 and to bring back the 10. To take the 9 and introduce that number 1, 9 plus 1. So that's where we are today. And actually Tisha B'Av this year, so the fast is on the 10th. So I guess that's the hint to that on the 10th day of the month, we have the power to introduce the missing one, the missing ingredient. And then a few days later, we're told in that Mishnah that there were no great holidays by the Israel, Yom Tov Yisrael, like the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur, which everybody hears that the first time they say, what? Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year. Tu B'Av and Chamish B'Av, most people don't even know it exists. Not Passover, it's also on the 15th of the month. Not Purim, not Sukkot, Chamish B'Av. So the Talmud struggles with it. There's 6, 7, 8 reasons that they try to figure out what is Chamish B'Av. And if you look at the Talmud, it doesn't answer the question, it just makes things even more complicated. They find all kinds of things, that there was the Korban Eitzim, and that there was the time when the Jews died and stopped dying. And there was, at the end, finally, Yom Tabar Magel is the day when the sun, the nights begin to get longer in Israel, and therefore they destroy the axe, because they can't bring, because when the sun is at full strength, it dries out the wood, so it's the proper wood in the Beis HaMikdash. When the sun is not shining as much, so the wood can get wet, and therefore there's worms, etc. I mean, can you imagine? These are the reasons given. They're all powerful reasons. But what's the underlying reason, really? So if you think about it, all the reasons connect to unity, actually. Unity. So the Arizal, in the Kisra Arizal, he says, the reason is because the descent of Malchus, the abuse of Malchus, of the 10th, of the moon, he says, Malchus yarda ploi ploim, meaning the Malchus, the moon, was so damaged in the destruction. So that's why the full moon, when it's healed that month, in direct proportion, you read the Tzarech Aliyah, that's how great is its elevation. That's how great is its elevation. So Pesach doesn't come after such a destruction. Sukkot doesn't come after such a destruction. It's 15th of Av. That's why it's the greatest Yontif. And then you could find and say that's the deeper reason behind all the reasons that the Talmud says. So we have both sides to it. We have the destruction of dignity and the restoration of dignity. But a restoration that always has to be stronger than what was there before. Because if we only get back, Zov and Tagir Ikra, a businessman is not someone that lost $100 and made $100. A businessman has to make a profit. So that's why it says that when Mashiach comes, Tisha B'Av will be the greatest holiday. There'll be no joy like the joy of Tisha B'Av. So, dignity is the story. We have the opportunity to look at ourselves and recognize that we have the right, the birthright, to be valued. And it begins with valuing yourself. It makes no difference what others say about you. It makes no difference what others did to you. A person lives and consumed and is obsessed with what others said to them. How did that person have a right to hurt me or humiliate me? That doesn't help you build your dignity. That helps you become a victim, remain a victim. You don't want to be a victim at anyone's hands. You have to recognize that you have a connection to the highest source of all, God, and He wants you here. And it's not the way to go is to figure out how to get even with, or how those that hurt you should be hurt. Because even if it happens, how's that going to help you? The key is to look at, why am I so vulnerable to other people? Why am I so weak? And to recognize you don't have to be. So Tisha B'Av is a reminder of both sides. On one hand, yes, we're missing the one, because we live in a world that constantly is assaulting our psyche and our dignity. Number two, however, the second half of the day, we say Nachem. That means the birth of the Neil the Mashiach Shal Yisrael. So the first groan of the cow is that, yes, dignity has been fractured, has been ruptured. But the second groan of the cow is that the healing has been born. And that's what we have the ability to reconnect to. So in a strange way, you can say the darkness of the 9 days, it's so-called deprivation. We don't eat meat, we don't celebrate. It's considered a days of mourning to a certain extent. And of course, Tisha B'Av itself, this year after Shabbos, and Sunday if Mashiach doesn't come. But and we dim the lights, it's a dark day. But there's no such thing as darkness without deeper light. So it's the darkness, like the story with the woman in St. Louis, that the eclipse of the sun that can teach us more about dignity. When things are going well, you can convince yourself, hey, you know what? I feel good about myself. I'm valuable. It's when you are sensitive, like sensitive to the wound of the moon. You're sensitive to the wounds of this world and your own wounds. That's when you begin to recognize the need and the power to heal from it. And that comes down to connecting. Yes, connecting to God. That's what it comes down to. Connecting to the purpose of why you're here, the divine purpose. Connecting to influencing and impacting others, which is always the best way of avoiding you being impacted by them. Instead of the detractors and all the naysayers telling you, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. You initiate. You surround yourself with people who are initiators, who are leaders, who are pioneers, who tell you you could do it. Don't give up. You could do it. Forge ahead. People look for lessons from the Olympics. One of the things you see, and there's a lot of frivolous and superficial stuff, but one thing that you could say a positive, you see the drive for excellence. And as much as I'm sure everybody's told you can't do this, all these children, whether they're swimmers or gymnastics or gymnasts or this, I'm sure we're told you can't do it, you can't do it. And then you see somebody, a life dream has been fulfilled. Okay, fine, it may not be changing the world for the better, but it's a lesson. It's a lesson that do not listen to the ones that say no. Al yevish mepnei hamaligim. Don't be embarrassed, don't be by those that mock. So may this 9 turn into 10. May we find our dignity, and everyone have a blessed Yehavchi Yom Emelu, Sasan L'Simcha L'Moedim Tevim. May these days be transformed to holidays, joy and celebration, and may we be honored and merit finally the coming of the Mashiach and the third temple, which is waiting for our little move, and like the Rambam says, one act can tip the whole scale and bring the dignity back to us and back to the entire world. Thank you.
What does that mean? I mean, it doesn't have anything from itself. It gets it from...
I left something for you to...
No,
I didn't want it all to be understood, Just the answer is...